This matters to every homeschooler in the country. So, just to be very clear, these are evil, wicked people. These are not just buzzwords to homeschoolers. These are real. All of us know someone who's been through this meat grinder of a system they have that's supposedly to protect kids.
So hold the phone here a second. So she was in a public school.
This is who we're up against, and they have the media on their side. Hi, guys. We've got a tough story out of Connecticut today. It happened about 2 weeks ago. We've done a few posts on our social media, but we feel like this case, it's a tragedy out of Connecticut, and it deserves a more in-depth treatment. And so I'm here with Madelyn Michaels today. We're going to break down we're calling it the twisted tragedy in Connecticut, where they're twisting an event that happened to a young girl and using it as an excuse to punish and regulate homeschoolers. So this matters to every homeschooler in the country, but because they're going to use these sorts of things going into the future. But the most important thing is that you learn to identify how they do this. And so I'm joined today by Madelyn Michaels, our director of marketing, who will help break down what's going on in Connecticut. And then we're going to kind of discuss what this means for homeschoolers in Connecticut and across the country. So why don't you tell us what happened here, Madelyn?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, like you said, this is a harder topic to address. This is more somber. This is sad. A little girl is dead. It's not quite the same as this terrible politician. We got to attack this person. You got to send in your email, that kind of a thing. It's a little bit different. So basically, what happened was there's a young girl in Connecticut. Her name is Mimi Torrez-Garcia, or I think it's Jacqueline, and they called her Mimi. She was horrifically abused, and we have to say allegedly, so we don't get sued, but allegedly murdered. Now, 3 people have been either brought in for questioning or have been charged in connection with her death, which is her mother, her own mother, her mother's boyfriend, as well as her aunt, so her sister's mom. So all 3 of these people, the people that should have been protecting her, people that should have loved her, people that should have taken care of her, all 3 of these people have either been charged with something, they've been brought in for something. The mother herself has come out and said that, yes, she was starving her child and that she hadn't fed her for several weeks when she had passed away. She was restraining her with zip ties when she was bad. All kinds of just horrific, awful things that were happening. And what ended up occurring was she was killed. She died. And this family not only allowed it to happen, made it happen, but they took her body to the next house when they moved. And her remains were found recently in a plastic tub. So just to be very clear, these are evil, wicked people, just the worst of the world. There is nothing worse than this. I mean, I read this story and I literally got goosebumps. I could not fathom something. I have a daughter. I could not fathom something like that happening, doing something like that herself. Like, these are, again, the people that are supposed to be protecting her. Now, Emily's going to kind of lay this groundwork in a minute of why this matters.
How are they tying this to homeschooling? What's happening there? What's the angle for them?
Yeah. So this little girl was never homeschooled a day in her life, literally not a single day. She was in her local government school. And at the end of the year, she went home. That's when she was being tortured. That's when she died. And so 2 months after she's been missing, probably very likely already has passed away, her mother then says, "Oh, we're homeschooling. We're homeschooling." And she's already gone at this point as they're saying this. And so that is how this ties to homeschooling. They're using this story. A state rep is using this story. The media is using this story to completely spin it and to say that homeschoolers are at fault and they're the ones that caused this. But Emily, I know you looked into this a bit about what.
Okay, so just for some background, I was seeing the cries to regulate homeschooling coming out of Connecticut, but I did not dig deeply into the crime itself. That stuff is horrendous. And, those people, I hope that they face the full extent of the law, and I hope that they are I don't know if they have the death penalty in Connecticut, but I hope they have it, and I hope those people get it. I mean, this is, that's a lot of details I didn't know. I knew that the little girl had never been homeschooled a day in her life, and yet when she when this story breaks, immediately I saw headlines coming out of Connecticut that homeschooling is not regulated enough. And it wasn't just like one newspaper in her local town. It was like all the media in Connecticut immediately started parroting the exact same phrases. They're saying, lack of transparency and lack of accountability and terms like that, all of them, all at once. And of course, I'm like, this isn't our first rodeo, right? Like, I know what happened in Connecticut this spring where they tried to pass bills that would regulate. Well, they had some informal hearings, but they're basically floating the balloon. They're basically checking the water on regulating homeschooling in Connecticut this spring. I think it even drew the attention of like Candace Owens was talking about it and telling homeschoolers in Connecticut, you better stand up quick because they're after you. Well, then here I saw this news story break, and at first I was like, oh no, a tragedy involving a homeschool family. Just to be very clear, the statistics are that homeschool children are statistically much safer and much less likely to be abused. Being homeschooled does not entail, you're hiding something so you can abuse your children. It's the exact opposite. There are studies that show this. There are studies that show, the abuse rates in government school are way higher than we've been told, things like that. There's all sorts of data. But my first thought when I heard this story was, oh no, they picked a tragedy to paint homeschooling with. But then it turns out the little girl never homeschooled a day in her life and was never homeschooled. And, that literally there's no connection here other than they filled out a form at the school saying they intended to homeschool, but never did, of course, intend to homeschool at all. And so my immediate thought was they're going to paint homeschooling as, a bunch of rogue abusers who want anonymity so they can, horribly abuse their children.
Well,
And
and we should point out, I don't want mean to interrupt, but I just want to point something out that DCF was called to the home of this little girl multiple times by two different people in 2024 and in 2025. And so far, I have not seen the full interviews from DCF, but so far, what I have seen is that they came out and said, well, we know that she attended medical appointments in 22, 23, and early 2024. We didn't get any complaints then.
okay.
It's like, wait,
That's
wait.
ridiculous.
So hold the phone here a second. So she was in a public school, very likely already emaciated, right? She very likely already had signs of being abused, and she's got her teacher, she's got guidance counselors. Now DCF is involved. They've been called by two different people. Like, what? So what happened there? Is anybody going to talk about the fact that the system failed her so badly,
Right.
and now they're spinning this on homeschoolers? Like,
So just to like
no.
exactly, no homeschooler would say, well, she was enrolled in government school when she died, so clearly they're at fault. We wouldn't be so ridiculous as to blame, her history teacher for this happening, but they on the other side are being very quick to blame homeschooling for this happening. So just recognize a tactical difference there, that their side, their team government school, team big ed is happy to completely lie and manipulate and use people's emotions in a horrifying story to attack homeschooling. Meanwhile, homeschoolers would never dream of doing that back to them. We know, like, that this had nothing to do with homeschooling, but we're not going to blame her PE coach necessarily. Yes, I do think the system totally failed this little girl, and they have all this authority and accountability and funding for all these programs to keep our kids safe. And then continually we hear about tens of thousands of kids being routinely abused in foster care and wrongly taken by CPS and all the. I mean, these are not just buzzwords to homeschoolers. These are real. All of us know someone who's been through this meat grinder of a system they have that's supposedly to protect kids, and all of us know kids that have been totally failed by it anyway. But I just want it really obvious to homeschoolers, they have no problem lying about us and painting us for things that are not our fault, homeschoolers' fault, but we would never do the same back to them. And that's our integrity and their lack of integrity. But we don't want to go into every conflict over for the future of homeschooling, always just playing the nice guy. So we didn't go on the offense here and attack public schooling for this situation. They did. And so we need to learn from that, that A, they will do those things, and B, playing nice and being reasonable, and, just like, we can't always just assume the posture of we're going to be nice to everyone all the time, because they're happy to lie and they're happy to blame. And so it's something homeschoolers need to start really internalizing, is this is who we're up against, and they have the media on their side. That's really critical. Madelyn, before we got on this podcast, you asked me, make sure you walk people through kind of the what's happening here with the media. And, we know that they tried to regulate homeschooling earlier this year. They floated their little test balloons to see how that would work. Back in 2019, they actually filed legislation that would have regulated homeschooling further and required, in-person meetings with homeschool families, with school officials and government officials. They're trying regulations like that in New Jersey this year. They did that as well. So, but I think it needs to be, and it's hard to, like, it seems really just horrible to skip right over the horrific murder of this little girl. But there has to be, homeschoolers have to realize what's happening here is, number one, they have an agenda. The agenda is to regulate homeschooling. They have a track record of this. They were trying earlier this year. They have an agenda, and they are looking for a tragedy that they can attach to homeschooling, no matter how ridiculous and how concocted and how lying, and how manipulative it is. So number one, they're going to find a tragedy. Then they're going to harness emotional outrage. That's where the media came in with these coordinated attacks, these coordinated phrasing. And, what they're doing is, everyone knows a good homeschool family now. It's gotten to be where everyone knows someone who homeschools. So their initial response when they hear about regulating homeschooling is, oh, just leave those people alone. They're not causing any trouble. My niece homeschools, or my granddaughter is homeschooling, or, something like that. But if the media gets in on this and they start blasting headlines day in and day out about how unregulated and dangerous and abusive homeschooling can be, those people go, well, my niece homeschools and she's not like this at all. But I do think some regulations are reasonable. Right? It's a total paradigm shift from everyone kind of assumes homeschoolers are nice, decent people, to everyone kind of assumes most homeschoolers are abusive monsters, except the couple that they know that aren't. And so they've totally shifted the political wind behind homeschooling in their favor. And now homeschoolers feel like they're on the defense when we had nothing to do with this. This is not our situation. Being homeschooled had nothing to do with what happened to this girl. Obviously, we wouldn't say that being in the government school had anything to do with killing her or having her be murdered either.
But nobody protected her there. Nobody.
Right. I mean, the place where they have all mandatory reporters, where she's surrounded by every single adult as a mandatory reporter, where we actually sent those CPS people out, or, whatever, DHS, I think it is, in Connecticut. They investigate and they say, oh, she went to her well child checkup 2 years ago, so she's fine today. I mean, whatever. But so just step one, find a tragedy, that matches your agenda. Step two, turn the political winds against homeschooling, even just subconsciously in the minds of people who are otherwise, neutral / a little positive to homeschooling. And then, stage 3 would be something of, we need like a moral panic. We need people screaming out. We need justice. We need answers. This can never happen again. You have to get people worked up into a fervor. And that's exactly what this media whole mess is about. Something has to be done. We have to protect the children. It's like, and then immediately what will happen is there will be a legislator or two that comes in and says, yes, we have, we can take away this horrible pain you're all feeling. We can get justice for Mimi, and we're gonna fix all this. And that's already happened, right, Madelyn?
Yeah, there's a rep. I think it's Liz Linehan or Linehan. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but she's already saying, we need to have homeschoolers come to the table for a conversation. And I think something else is that they make it sound very common sense. Like, we got to collaborate on this. We'll just have some conversations. At the same time, there's a change.org petition out there calling for stricter laws concerning homeschoolers, for sending DCF, to people's houses, things like that. It's like, wait. They already had the ability to go check on this girl, and 2 different people called them. What happened? So clearly, it's obvious that does not fix the problem, but the fact that there are several hundred people who have signed this change.org petition, calling for stricter laws on homeschoolers, it's like, I don't know how many of them are just far radicals who really just hate homeschooling, and how many of them are people that have just been manipulated, by the
Right.
press. Um, I think for me, the encouraging part of this whole story is what already happened earlier this spring, is the fact that they were having these informal hearings, on restricting homeschoolers, and homeschoolers showed up. And they didn't just show up and say, like, no, no, we're not like this. We're not so bad. Like, look, see, my kids are dressed and fed and not filthy. Like,
Right.
no, no, that wasn't the attitude at all. The attitude when they all showed up at the Capitol was, you're not going to do this.
Right.
We're not going to allow you to do this. And so those informal hearings resulted in bills being shut down. Legislation that was being drafted was all basically destroyed at that point.
I
So
mean, yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, that homeschoolers immediately jumped to their own defense back in the spring, but I wanna just make sure homeschoolers realize a couple of things. One, there was no media coverage lambasting homeschooling for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks leading up to those informal hearings, right? If they tried that again, the amount of momentum on the other team side to regulate homeschooling is much more powerful than it was in the spring, because now we have this horrible case in this sweet little girl, right? And so what we need to avoid is every single time the media invents a narrative, lies, manipulates, and the legislators are in on it, right? They want this media propagated. They want this idea propagated by the media, and they want this idea spread into the people to soften up the population for future regulation. Well, just recognize a few more of these, and it doesn't matter how many homeschoolers show up at the Capitol. If they're getting thousands and thousands of people calling for regulating homeschooling because of, this little girl, and they get, let's say they get 10,000 people call their office or call the legislature, House and Senate, and demand more regulations, and they get 2,000 homeschoolers show up for 2 days or 1 day in the spring, and they're gonna go, well, I have to represent my voters, and my voters, 10 to 1 have said they want more regulations. We are only winning so long as the other side is not pushing as hard, or they're not manipulating a media story, and all homeschoolers are willing to drive to the Capitol repeatedly, probably multiple times a year coming. It's like we have to have different tactics, starting with not going on the defense, starting with immediately the minute a story like this breaks. And this is something that we do here at the Homeschool Freedom Coalition. When a story like this starts happening, we have to immediately be contacting the legislature and immediately get in front of the media buzz and say, no, 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 you're not going to spin this narrative. This isn't how it's going to work. We have software to help do that. We have, we'll get it where we have petitions running in Connecticut right now so people can communicate directly with their legislators very quickly. We'll have pre-written emails so that folks don't have to sit down. We know how busy everyone is. Like, we are going to make it very easy for us to fight differently, for homeschoolers to fight more effectively and differently, and to be more, we can't be constantly on the defense against stories like this because they're just going to lie. We know that now. It's obvious. And so we have to pivot to winning tactics, getting ahead of these points, getting ahead of these arguments, and communicating directly with legislators very quickly. We're not waiting until, how long it takes to plan one of those days at the Capitol. like I've done those. I have planned them at the Capitol here in Texas. I know the amount of man hours Capitol days take in these situations. Like, we don't have time for that sometimes. Every day is another news headline. The other side is getting landed more blows against homeschooling. So all that to say, this is a horrible story, but it's a good illustration of what the other side will do and what we need to do differently in response to stories like this going forward.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna be doing more videos on this as the story kind of progresses, because I think, it's like you said, it's not just impacting Connecticut. This is something that, like, this, I'm seeing these news headlines and these articles all across the country. The story isn't just being used in Connecticut. They're gonna use it in my state, your state. all over the place. So we're going to have more updates as things are happening, as we hear of legislation that's being drafted, as bills are popping off. So I hope that you guys will follow us, like us, share us, all the things. We need more homeschoolers in this fight. And I'm personally very encouraged to see the number of homeschoolers that are getting involved and want to fight back and want to protect, what we have. So thank you guys for joining us today. I hope that you will follow along. We'll have a lot of updates coming very soon.